Hello, and welcome everyone to our Atlas webinar today, which is on leveraging reporting policies to reduce food waste. This is the latest webinar in the Atlas series, and I'm Emily Broadleib. I'm the director of the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School, and I'm really glad to welcome you today. And we have a really, really great program. So just as a quick reminder, if you can find the globe button at the bottom of your screen, you can select either English or Spanish. One of our speakers today will be speaking in Spanish. But if you want to listen to the entire webinar in Spanish, you also can select Spanish now and choose the language you want to listen to. So if you choose your language now, you'll be able to understand everything. And I want to also quickly thank our co-hosts of this webinar series, the Global Food Banking Network and Food Systems for the Future. And both of them will have representatives speaking and moderating the webinar today. So on the next slide, you can see an image from the Global Food Donation Atlas Policy Project. The Atlas is a policy project that's a collaboration between the Global Food Banking Network and my program, the Food Law and Policy Clinic. And it was really inspired by the paradox of enormous rates of food loss and waste at the same time that we see high and unfortunately in the past few years, rising rates of global hunger. So about a third of the world's food supply is lost or wasted. And annually, more than 800 million people face hunger. And again, that's even increased in the last few years because of different global crises. So not all the food that gets wasted today is safe and edible, but a lot of it is. And a lot of it gets wasted for various reasons. It's surplus, it's imperfect, and really in a lot of cases, policies aren't set up to make it clear or easy to identify food that can safely be donated. So this project was really launched to help develop a better understanding of the laws and policies that impact food waste, food recovery, and food donation. What are the things that could make it easier, unlock some of the barriers, make sure that food that's donated is safe as well, and provide the incentives to ensure that more of that food gets to people who need it. So what we've done is we mapped the laws and policies affecting food donation in countries around the globe to inspire long-term solutions. And support for the project has come from the Walmart Foundation, Lineage Foundation, and Hoffman Family Foundation. So on the next slide, you can see our goals for the webinar today, which are, this is really part of a multi-session series. And at the end, we'll let you know about our next webinar upcoming in June. And the goal of this session is really to understand concerns and challenges regarding design and implementation of reporting policies. And my colleague Gray Norton in a little bit is going to introduce like what are some of the reporting policies we've looked at. But reporting policies that require reporting on emissions or on food waste are really driving better understanding of where that waste is occurring and unlocking new opportunities to reduce waste, including ensuring recovery and donation. So we're going to understand concerns and challenges, hear about some of the best practices, and then talk about policy considerations and what governments should know or are doing to really adopt best practices depending on where they are in being able to leverage reporting. So just taking a quick step back, the Atlas project, I know for those who have joined us before, you've heard me talk about this, but the goals of the project are to identify and analyze laws across countries. We're now in 25 countries doing that. Recommend policy change for those individual countries, but also we have policy issue briefs on a range of issues, including the issue for today's webinar, which is reporting policies. That really provide a starting point for countries trying to think about this topic and what are some of the best practices out there. We work on global engagement through our website, which is really interactive, and through webinars like this. And then we provide technical assistance to some of our in-country partners. These are the legal issues we've generally covered. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but just to say that from the beginning of the project, we really interviewed stakeholders, including nonprofits, food recovery organizations, businesses, and government, to really understand like what are the barriers, what are the questions you have, what's making it hard to reduce waste and hard to donate. And there were 7 key issues that came up, which you can see on this slide. So those have been a focus for a lot of our work. They are topics that we've tracked across countries. And now we've been moving on to look into other topics, like the topic for today around reporting, which wasn't initially on our radar, but as more and more countries are looking at reporting schemes, we've realized this was a topic that really is helpful for all of the Atlas community and our partners to understand better. So on the next slide, you can see just quickly, this is a screenshot of some of the information you can find on our website, which is atlas.foodbanking.org. And we can put the link in the chat. There's an interactive map. You can see just a still shot of it right now, but you can go through different policies and click on them and see how countries are doing, which have best practices that you might want to look into. And then there's a detailed library of the laws and policy recommendations for the countries where we've worked. And then on the next slide, you can see one other element of our website, which are policy issues. So if you click on the policy tab, you can learn about each of these issues and go deeper with issue briefs, links to webinars like this one, or synopses of webinars that we held on earlier topics where we weren't yet recording them. And there's a lot of information there. So I encourage you to go there and check some of that out. So I'm now, with great pleasure, I'm going to get us moving on to our speakers. So we're going to hear some presentations first. I'm excited in a moment to turn it over to Gray Norton, my colleague in the Food Law and Policy Clinic, who's going to talk a little bit more about the topic for today and about findings from a recent issue brief. And then we'll hear briefly from our colleague, Doug O'Brien, our great partner at Global Food Banking Network, who's really been on this Atlas journey with us this whole way. And then our moderator, Earthren Cousin, who's been an amazing part of this series and is also, through her organization, Food Systems for the Future, a co-host of the webinar series. And Earthren will then moderate the presentations of today's panelists, some discussion with the speakers, and then we will have time for Q&A. And you can, at any point, start sharing questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, let me introduce my colleague, Gray Norton, who is a clinical fellow and attorney at the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. Her portfolio focuses on the clinic's food system justice work and climate and sustainability initiatives. And she has really been working hard on a couple of our issue briefs, including the one that we published a few weeks ago and she'll talk about today around reporting policies. Gray has a JD and an MPA and a certificate in sustainability from the University of Arkansas. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gray to take us to the next step.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. As Emily mentioned, I'm going to share a high-level overview of the issue brief that the Global Food Donation Policy Atlas published at the end of April. And it focused on opportunities to reduce food waste through emissions, environmental, and food waste reporting policies. So first, I'm going to share just some brief background on the types of reporting that we looked at in the issue brief, and then later I'll highlight some key issues and some recommendations. So let's get started with some of the brief background. So our issue brief focused on three main types of reporting. So environmental, social, and governance reporting, which I'll refer to as ESG moving forward, Scope 3 emissions reporting, and food loss and waste reporting. So soon you're going to hear from our panelists about a lot of food loss and waste reporting. So I'm going to say just a little bit more background on ESG and Scope 3 emissions reporting and how they relate to food waste. So ESG reporting refers to a broad assessment of an entity's sustainability impacts across three categories. Those ones I mentioned: environmental, social, and governance. And the environmental category is what we looked at because it includes the risks that a business activities pose to the environment, including its impacts on natural resources and its contributions to pollution and waste. And this environmental component of ESG can also encompass greenhouse gas emissions reporting, which can include Scope 3 emissions reporting as well. And so there's three types of scopes of greenhouse gas emissions that companies can target and measure for their reporting initiatives. We focused on Scope 3, but I'll briefly introduce Scopes 1 and 2 to perhaps hopefully help put Scope 3 in context. So Scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from sources that an entity owns or controls. So think of these as like the emissions that are coming directly out of the smokestack of the entity. For example, like the emissions from the boiler in an entity's building. And so those are going to be direct emissions. This is going to be in contrast to Scope 2 emissions, which are indirect emissions from an entity's energy consumption. So think of these as an example of like emissions from the electricity that the entity purchases. So the emissions that are coming from the power company for that, from those emissions or from those purchases, those are going to be that Scope 2 emissions reporting. And that brings us to scope 3, which is really where we focus on with the issue brief. And scope 3 emissions are all the rest of an entity's indirect emissions. So it encompasses quite a lot. All the leftover indirect emissions that are not part of scope 2 emissions that are going to be in an entity's operations and along its value chain. And this includes both upstream and downstream emissions. And scope 3 emissions can be really difficult for companies to measure comprehensively because, as you can imagine, when the emissions originate from various partners in the reporting company's value chain, they don't own those, that don't necessarily own those the emissions that are the partners, or excuse me, that they don't necessarily own the entities where those emissions are arising. And so it can be challenging for them to measure them. But most importantly for our conversation here, scope 3 emissions includes emissions from the company's waste, and that includes food waste. And for sectors like the food and beverage industry, food waste is a major contributor to scope 3 emissions. And so reducing food waste can really reduce scope 3 emissions and make a significant impact on a company's overall emissions goals. And so after we did some of our research, we identified some key issues and opportunities that the environmental emissions and food waste reporting policies could address. And so I'll share some of those with you now. So first, one of the first issues that we really became aware of was that companies can't effectively reduce their food loss and waste if they're not aware of how much food loss and waste they cause or where it occurs in their operations along the supply chain. So again, remember, thinking about scope 3, it's both upstream and downstream emissions, so it would be waste from there as well. But reporting mechanisms like ESG, scope 3 emissions, and food loss and waste reporting can provide companies with a process to both target and measure their waste and the resulting emissions that come from that waste. And this could help them become aware of their food loss and waste activities and then determine opportunities for waste reduction and food recovery. And so sometimes there's going to be mandatory reporting policies, and I'll talk a little bit about some examples of those here in a minute. But when no mandatory reporting requirements exist, the companies themselves can choose to voluntarily report, and many often do on their scope 3 emissions or their food loss and waste activities. But the issue that we found here is that there are so many different voluntary frameworks that companies can choose from, and navigating the fragmented landscape of voluntary reporting frameworks can be costly, confusing, can even be challenging for reporting entities. And when they're facing those types of issues, kind of with trying to navigate that landscape, that could cause friction. It may make them want to abandon reporting efforts altogether because it's just not going to be efficient and easy for them to engage in the process. And furthermore, like that, there's going to be an absence of standardized coordinating reporting methodologies. So even when there's a bunch of different options, they aren't necessarily all standardized to show the same types of data. And so when companies are choosing different ones, it can be challenging to compare the data across the companies. And so this can make the information inconsistent and incomparable. And that really can lead to an inadequate understanding of the food loss and waste problem overall. And so this makes it really hard. And so people don't really know what they're looking at when they're trying to understand this information. And it also can lead to pervasive assumptions from third parties that the reporting is merely greenwashing, which can be a barrier for companies who want to engage in that reporting as well. And we also learned that emissions reporting requires robust data collection. And so if the reporting frameworks are going to require entities to obtain data from food recovery organizations, and that data would be to confirm like how much food was received or whether the food was actually diverted from the landfill, if there's going to be those requirements from the food recovery organizations, then they're going to need to figure out how to collect that data. And they're going to need to dedicate time and administrative resources to calculating the emissions reductions from their food donation activities. And this could potentially be burdensome to the food recovery organizations themselves, who already have limited resources, considering their main source of resources, philanthropic donations. So those are some of the issues that we've identified in our research. Now let's take a look at some of the recommendations for ways that governments can resolve those issues with policy. So the first kind of set of issues that we looked at was trying to figure out like how can we illuminate the amount of food waste and how can policies help companies illuminate the amount of food waste and identify opportunities to both increase food donations and reduce food waste. Well, first, governments can require companies to measure. First, the governments can require companies to measure and report their emissions. So in general, as companies report on their waste and their resulting emissions, they're likely then to become aware of that waste and then take steps to reduce it. And this can be beneficial in the context of food loss and waste reduction. And it can also be helpful because of the considerable impact that reducing the emissions, particularly the methane emissions that come from that food waste, will make on reducing overall global temperature rise, excuse me. And so some countries have attempted to clarify and streamline their ESG and Scope 3 emissions reporting for companies through like reporting requirements and mandatory climate disclosures. And some of the examples that we explore further in the issue brief are the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. But when there isn't always going to be that requirement. And so in the absence of a broader emissions reporting requirement, we recommend requiring at least standardized food loss and waste reporting. And you're going to hear about standardized food loss and waste reporting from our panelists here in a moment more extensively, but it's worth mentioning at the moment that actions that promote progress in food loss and waste reduction, like mandatory food loss and waste reporting, can be vital tools in global and national emissions reduction goals. And what we found in our research is that there really are few governments that mandate food loss and waste reporting from companies. But one kind of glimmer of hope right now is that the United Kingdom Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has come close to requiring food loss and waste or food waste reporting, excuse me. They considered it through consultation in 2022, and then they abandoned the effort initially, but in November of 2023, they announced that they're reconsidering mandatory food waste reporting in consultation with larger food companies. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on because there could be some progress and momentum headed that way. And then also, so in the kind of the absence of the requirements, we recommend incentivizing environmental, social, and governance reporting or Scope 3 emissions reporting or even food loss and waste reporting. And this can be done through like initiatives, voluntary agreements, or even certifications like the 10 by 20 by 30 initiative and the Pacto por la Comida that you're going to hear about later from our panelists today. So when we looked at a second set of recommendations, we were hoping to try to help understand like how can policies help entities navigate the varying reporting standards. So if you recall, one of those key issues is that there's a lot of different reporting standards out there, and it can sometimes be hard to understand which one entities should use and which kind of data they should be collecting for those. And so how can policies help entities both navigate those and then to promote clarity and consistency in reporting? Well, governments could endorse a specific reporting standard, for example. And so we have seen this through several jurisdictions. In fact, endorsed the International Sustainability Standards Board financial standards. And that's really where we've seen a lot of momentum picking up. For example, the G7, the G20, and even most recently Brazil, with their mandatory climate disclosures, have endorsed the ISSB standards. And according to the ISSB's website, about 144 jurisdictions have endorsed these standards. So there is some momentum picking up in that direction. And then you're also going to hear about the food loss and waste accounting standard from our panelist, Brian Lipinski, here in a moment, which is another opportunity to standardize food loss and waste and reporting and accounting. And then another way to provide clarity and consistency as reporting is to increase access to shared data frameworks to make reporting more manageable for smaller companies. And so what this could look like is policymakers could contemplate ways to both support and incentivize smaller companies to target, measure, and report their food loss and waste emissions. This can be done through grants to support those efforts, or by helping them to build supportive networks to collect the needed reporting data, or providing technical assistance to smaller businesses. Grants could also support like nonprofits or coalitions among food companies, agencies, technology companies, food recovery organizations, and other non-governmental organizations to work towards that standardized shared data framework and protocol for ESG and Scope 3 emissions reporting. In the issue brief, we took a look at this coalition called the BRC Mandra Coalition, and it brings together industry and governments, technology partners, and NGOs to build this unified emissions data platform that coalition members can then access to understand a little bit more about the data that's coming from other entities for their Scope 3 emissions reporting needs. And so the Mandra Coalition works with the food companies to create a system that prioritizes both the high quality data that they need from their suppliers along their value chain, but within a shared framework that also protects proprietary knowledge. And so there's rules around that, because that can also be a concern with these sort of types of shared data frameworks. And then countries that require emissions or food loss and waste reporting should consider ways to support food recovery organizations that are going to need to provide entities with the data, both from food donations and resulting emissions reductions. And so that's a little bit about what we investigated in the issue brief, but I encourage everyone to take a deeper dive and visit the link on the Atlas website. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug O'Brien, who's the Vice President of Programs from the Global Food Banking Network, for a brief presentation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gray. That was excellent. And we appreciate all the work put in this issue brief. I just want to put all this in context for everyone, because this isn't simply an issue about data. It really gets more deeply than that. It affects all of us. Right now, we're badly off track to achieve the SDGs, probably worse than we were when the 2030 agenda was adopted. Right now, 30 to 40% of the world's food is lost or wasted, contributing 10% of GHG emissions. Climate action is behind. 2023 was the warmest year in 174 years of record keeping, and GHG levels are now higher than any time in the pre-industrial era. And that matters because that then impacts not just the availability of food and accessibility of food for low-income people, but has actually helped push us back from progress we had made prior. In fact, FAO reports that all progress made during the preceding decade has brought the world back to hunger levels that prevailed in 2005. But this is not just a negative issue, it's a positive issue, because we have the solutions in front of us. As Gray mentioned, for food companies to make progress in preventing food loss and waste across the supply chain, they have to be able to measure it. And a 2022 study by McKinsey, at the request of the food industry, suggested that as much as 70% of the food that is lost, primarily at the early sectors of the supply chain, could be redirected, could be recovered and redirected for human consumption. But it begins with measurement, which we're talking about today. Getting to 70% means that you have to identify first and foremost baseline measures. And for a large corporation, that might be easier than it would be for smaller or medium-sized enterprises. But working together and providing the models as is lined out in the recommendations, all food companies and the suppliers to larger food companies can help identify where losses occur, where the hotspots are, and then offer a requirement or incentive to reduce it, to reduce the level of food loss and waste. But now we get to management, and this is what I think is the most hopeful part of the entire presentation that I'm going to provide, which is that in a lot of conversations about innovation and new ideas that we need to engage to prevent food loss and waste beyond, I mean, the measurement. But right now we have the tools in front of us. Spread across more than 90 countries worldwide, there are more than 1,000 community-based food banks operating to do food recovery. And that's why food donation is so important. They have the infrastructure, the logistics, and the partnerships that with agri-food businesses to recover, redistribute really as much food as is available and get that then to hungry people so we can get closer to our SDG 2 target of zero hunger. So going forward, I just want to leave with this as we go through these presentations, because this isn't just about data needs, and it actually has a real life implication, which is, this is what I like to say others are saying about this. If we save just 1/4 of the food loss and waste and redirect it for hunger, we could serve 187 million people in this year alone. That's all the food chronically hungry people on the planet. Reducing food loss reducing food loss early in the supply chain is likely to yield the greatest win-win for the strongest positive result in food security. And the most interesting research that came out last summer was from the International Food Policy and Research Institute, which said that having food loss and waste in the SDG 12.3 target, having food loss and waste in developing countries may contribute an additional 2% to countries' GDP, lift millions of people out of poverty, while improving the diets and overall food security, with the greatest gains occurring early in the supply chain. That's the role of food banks and food donation in this work. So as we go through this, the various panelists, just want to say that what it's offering isn't just about data. It has real world implications. And we're grateful that you're on this webinar, and we're grateful for our partnership with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. And with that said, I want to turn it over to my colleague and longtime friend, Earthman Cousin. Earthman is the official monitor for these virtual meeting series. She is the CEO and founder of Food Systems for the Future, which is supporting the series along with GFN. Earthman is a visiting scholar to Center on Food Security and the Environment at Stanford University, and is a distinguished fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She previously served as executive director of the World Food Program and U.S. ambassador to the UN agencies for food and agriculture. And prior to her global hunger work, she helped lead U.S. domestic hunger effort to fight domestic hunger, while serving as executive vice president and chief operating officer of America's Second Harvest, now Feeding America, where she and I work together. Earthman, with that said, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Doug, for that very generous introduction. I appreciate you for your leadership and your friendship. As Doug said, the global commitment to transformation of the food system for environmental as well as human health requires reducing food loss and waste. During my time as executive director of the World Food Program, one of the things that we were quite aware of was that the food loss and waste in the post-harvest food loss and waste on the continent of Africa totaled more than all of the food assistance that WFP brought onto the continent on an annual basis. Imagine what that could mean for ending hunger across the continent if we were able to capture the food loss and waste. The issue of reporting is critical to ensuring our ability to capture that food loss and waste and to properly document it, to avoid both greenwashing and nutrition washing, which is why I'm so excited to participate in this conversation today. We have an impressive group of panelists from around the world for this meeting. Brian Lipinski is the research associate for the food program of the World Resources Institute, USA. Claudia Sanchez Castro is the national coordinator of Pacto por la Comida, BAMX Mexico. She'll be joined by Gabriela Rosato, the National Strategic Alliance Manager at BAMX. And our final speaker of the day is Janelle Myers. Janelle is Kellanova's Chief Sustainability Officer and co-chair of the Consumer Goods Forum on Food Loss and Waste. The speakers will present their topics for about 10 minutes each. And we will begin with Brian Lipinski. Brian is as I said, is a research associate with the food program at the World Resources Institute. And during his time at WRI, he has worked extensively on the topic of food loss and waste. Brian is also the co-author of Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standards. With no further ado, let's start with Brian's presentation.
Thank you so much, Earthrin, and thank you for having me today. Very happy to be here to talk about the importance of reporting when it comes to making progress on the extremely important issue of food loss and waste. So everyone so far has already done a great job of setting up that issue. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standard, which is the first of its kind in terms of providing a framework for companies, countries, nonprofits, whoever else, to measure and report on food loss and waste. So looking at this slide, you can see that the approach that we like to take at World Resources Institute when it comes to food loss and waste is a simple one. We call it the Target, Measure, Act approach. So simply enough, you start by setting a target. We heard about SDG 12.3 from Doug. We think that's the target that folks should be setting. You measure and you share your results publicly. And then most importantly, even though we're focusing on measurement today and reporting, that's all to facilitate action. We're trying to encourage action to occur, and measurement helps to create the best available information and the best available platform for that action to occur. And I'll talk a little bit about why I believe that's the case. So as we've talked about, I'm talking about the food loss and waste protocol today. which is a multi-stakeholder effort that developed the Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standard. So the standard is the first of its kind in terms of introducing a way for entities to measure and report exclusively on food loss and waste. And so you can see this was a partnership between many different organizations from the UN, from the private sector, from the public sector, and we at World Resources Institute serve as the secretariat. So some of the benefits that come from using this standard to report on food loss and waste within a country, within a business, we've already hit on some of these, but I think it's important that, again, we're talking about measurement in service of action. So without measurement, without reporting, we don't know where we're starting from. We can't tell if we're making progress. So it seems pretty straightforward, but for that reason, it's very important to know a baseline of what's happening with food loss and waste data and then be able to track progress over time. It also helps you to identify hotspots in terms of what stages of the food supply chain, what types of foods, where effort should be focused. And by that same token, it helps you understand the size of the opportunity. This isn't just waste is such a loaded term in terms of sounding negative, but actually there's a big opportunity here to save more food, to make more food available. And so that's what this measurement helps to allow for, is that you understand what that opportunity is. In terms of the benefits, especially of public reporting, using the standard helps to create a common language and consistency between organizations. So for example, if I were to say that my company wastes 10% of our food, and you said your company wastes 5% of your food, sounds like you're doing better, but actually within our definitions, we don't know what we're considering to be food waste. So the importance of a standard is that comparability and being able to speak in a common language. And then I'll talk a little bit about the practical guidance and the reporting framework. So looking at this diagram, you can see this is everything that could end up being food loss and waste. So we start with all of the food that's produced in the world. You can sort that into food and its inedible parts, meaning things like bones and rinds of fruit. And then as this animation progresses, you'll see that we end up in a situation where food either gets consumed or food is not consumed, and it's sent to a series of what we call destinations. And so I think the most common thing we think of when we talk about food waste, we think of all of that ending up in a landfill. But actually, there's quite a range of places that it can end up. For the sake of our conversation today, I'm not going to get into all of these destinations because that's a lot of very technical definitions. But in this next diagram, you'll see what goes into a food loss and waste inventory under the Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standard. So the 4 key elements are the time frame, what time frame is being measured, the material type, the food versus those inedible parts, as I mentioned, the destinations, so where it goes when it ends up not reaching a human, and then things like, we call them boundaries. It's a little bit about the geography, the type of food, the stage of the food supply chain where it occurs. And so when countries or organizations or companies are reporting using this framework, it helps you to understand what's happening in a consistent and clear way so that you're comparing apples to apples, pardon the food-related cliche, but that you're making comparisons that are starting with an even denominator and an even understanding. And then from here, this helps you to understand where your opportunities are and where you can make progress. So going forward, we see that there are a number of initiatives and companies and organizations using this standard already. As far as I can tell, it's the most widely adopted way of reporting on specifically food loss and waste. I won't go into each of these just for the sake of time, but you can see that it's a range of organizations and initiatives that have adopted the Food Loss and Waste Accounting and Reporting Standard and are using it to report on food loss and waste. And I would just like to add that even when some organizations or companies or countries aren't specifically using the framework provided by the standard, the guiding principles are very widely adopted. So this notion, for example, of destinations, this was something that was not very widespread before the publication of the standard. And actually, even within the US, we had agencies reporting different levels of food waste for the country because they were including different destinations in their definitions. So just to help establish the importance of that. But so many countries and companies are using the concept, at least of destinations, to help understand their issues. We're going to hear a little bit, I know, from my colleagues in Mexico who have done a similar study and used this framework for their understanding of what's happening within Mexico. So this is something that's been being used not just by companies, not just by countries, but across a range of stakeholders. So, and just an example of that is that we have a number of case studies also that if you go to our website at flwprotocol.org, if you search food loss and waste protocol, you'll find it. There are a number of examples of companies who have been making use of this standard, as well as other organizations. And I just wanted to flag one more resource that's on our website regarding specifically greenhouse gas emissions. So this is about connecting food loss and waste to greenhouse gas emissions. It says guidance for companies, but actually, I think this is usable by a wide range of stakeholders. And it's really about connecting the issue of food loss and waste to that of greenhouse gas emissions. So just to give you an example of the sort of guidance that's included in this document, in this next diagram, this is actually tying in with what we've heard already about scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3 when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. And so this diagram shows where in those various scopes food loss and waste is likely to appear. So the icons that are in purple here, the purchased goods and services, waste generated in operations, company facilities, and end-of-life treatment of sold products. Those are all where we believe are the most likely food loss and waste links to greenhouse gases. So that's just one of the resources that's available. I would encourage you to check it out if that's something that is of interest to you. And I have some recommendations here in terms of food loss and waste reporting. For the sake of time, I'm not going to spend much time on them because they are nearly identical to what we already heard from Gray in terms of what's necessary for food loss and waste reporting going forward. We strongly believe that it should be mandatory for companies and that government should also be reporting on food loss and waste. As Gray mentioned, the UK, we saw some signs of progress. We saw some backsliding. We're seeing some hope again. So hopefully that'll set an example for other countries going forward. We think that all greenhouse gas inventories should include food loss and waste in those measurements. And then in terms of making reporting easier, there should be more effort devoted to these smaller companies and organizations and governments making data available that it can be used as proxy data, that can be used as estimates for their own food loss and waste. In those cases where they don't necessarily have the resources or the time or the expertise to carry out their own full food loss and waste reporting inventory. So very similar to what we already heard from Gray, so very much in alignment there. So I'll wrap up my comments here. Looking forward to any questions and comments and very much looking forward to the presentations from my fellow speakers. So again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for those very, very insightful and important both indications of the progress that we're making, as well as the recommendations that you suggest for how we continue to move forward on this important issue. Next, we'll hear from Claudia Sanchez Castro and Gabriela Rosato from the National Services Office of the Food Bank Networks of Mexico. Claudia is a biologist with a master's degree in applied biotechnology and a master's degree in energy and environmental policy. Then Gabriela is also from the National Services Office, and she also promotes innovative projects against food loss and waste, throughout the national territory and with international partners as well. Gabriela has worked for several years in the food bank networks of Mexico, at the local food bank in Tuxtla Gutierrez, Chiapas, as a procurement manager. And Gabriela holds a master's degree in international relations for international cooperation and integration from the University of Palermo in Italy. Let me remind everyone to use your interpretation button on the bottom of your screen, because it's my understanding that one of our speakers may deliver her remarks in Spanish. With that, over to you, Claudia and Gabriela.
Muchísimas gracias. Buen día a todos. Un agradecimiento por parte de la Red de Bancos de Alimentos y de todos nuestros compañeros y nuestra directora
Thank you very
general.
much. Thank you on behalf of the whole food banking network in Mexico. We want to present on the Pact for Food, the only voluntary agreement in Latin America. Very well. This is a snapshot of what was done in 2017. We have data on number of foods from the basic staples. At that time, up to 37% of the food produced in Mexico was being wasted. It represents 2.5% of the gross domestic product, and this equals over 36 tons of carbon emissions equivalent. That's equivalent to 15 million cars and the emissions they generate during a year. We also have the problems of water shortages. More than 40 million cubic meters of water are being consumed every year. That would equal the consumption of the whole population of Mexico in 2.4 years. This is what is being used for industrial purposes. So 4.4 million hectares of land is used for the production of products that are then not consumed. So next slide, please. In Mexico, well, we had in 2017, we formed a working group of experts. We have cooperated also with the Environmental Coalition, with Mexico, US, and Canada. Starting 2015, we generated some materials, first of all, to create awareness about the loss and waste of food. And also FAO has conducted several field studies, and there's also an application that the Food Bank Network created to be able to rescue food from the hospitality sector and from the fields. And there's several books also published by Dr. Aguilar, and we keep compiling data. Now, what are the efforts at the national level to measure food loss and waste? Well, what we cannot measure, we cannot fix. So 2017, the study by the World Bank and Dr. Senara Aguilar, we have that information. Initially, also in 2017, FAO measured the level of waste in three main food productions: tomatoes, corn, and beans. 2019, the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, with the support of 14 universities, conducted a survey to better understand what food waste was being generated and what were the organic materials that were being taken to landfills. Also, through a group of experts, we started creating a framework to better learn how FLW could be prevented at the national level through an intersectorial group. So we formed this group of experts at the national level. We identified all the hot spots along the food chain, and we started to see how all the actors could contribute to solve these issues with the food chain, with the supply chain. Also, we started working with the UK in 2015 under the leadership of RAP. Now, these voluntary agreements that RAP initiated, they exist all over the world now, in some countries like Australia, Indonesia, and the US. For the time being, we're the only country in Latin America that's doing this, and we started implementing it in 2021. The name we gave it here was Pacto por la Comida, Pact for Food. This project started with the support of RAP and under the leadership of the Food Bank Network. We are the only food bank here that's leading these voluntary agreements. And we have the support, a technical support of experts on food waste with the Boston Foundation consultancy. As I was saying, what Pacto por la Comida, as a voluntary agreement, seeks to achieve is to establish these channels of communication amongst all the stakeholders, universities, industry, food banks, and to have a channel to communicate with consumers so we can achieve this 50% reduction in FLW in the next 10 years. So we have to go from prevention to reduction and then to the redistribution of food to the most vulnerable populations. So what we do is we reach out to companies, we show them the benefits of measuring FLW so that we have better data on what they're doing. They have baseline information that they can report internationally, also report on their best practices. And if they recognize also that they're wasting what they're producing, that means money wasted. So we really look to show them this benefit so that companies can implement systems to reduce food loss and waste. Now, these voluntary agreements, first we sign confidentiality agreements. The information we get from the companies is not published or distributed, not even to other companies. We handle everything with high level of confidentiality. And what we seek is to map the information we're receiving so that we can standardize it and have a common language. And we ask them for information, first of all, about the place they are located in the chain, how many tons they're producing if they work in the fields that are producers, and also what happens, what's the final destination of the product, what happens with the products that they are not distributing, if it goes to donations, if it's composted or it's used for animal feed. So we try to determine what the critical points are so we can establish goals with them so that they can reduce their emissions and their waste every year. So I'll give the floor now to my colleague, Gabriela Rosato.
An honor to be here. Thank you to the GFN for the invitation and to the Harvard University to coordinate this panel. It's so interesting listening to every one of you. I agree with everyone, with all that you share with us. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experiences. And this is what we are doing from the Mexican Food Banking Network. We have been working with companies, and we have been pushing them to, and we have been working with our donors, main donors and companies from the food manufacturing sectoring, from retail sectoring. And what we have tried to show them is the benefits of working on reducing food losses and waste. As a food banking network at national level, we must focus on food loss and waste reduction too, because in our perspective, less food waste means more food donation and more food surpluses that can go be channeled into vulnerable people and communities and relieve hunger. So these are kind of benefits of being part of these initiatives. And as we said, we are still the very first initiative on reducing food loss and waste at Latin American Caribbean level. So we try to gather all these companies and push them to see the economic value for saving money for not managing their food loss and waste, sharing their best experiences, learn more from other companies, what they're doing, and sharing innovative practices. And of course, the proportion of the reduction is higher than the investment that they would do to be part of this initiative. If we move on with our presentation, we can see that we have both a mixed range of companies that participate in our initiative. As I said, we have manufacturer companies. One of them are globally known, like Telenova or Unilever or Nestle, and other companies are national based or international based, like Bimbo, like Grupo Herdes or Alpura. And we have like a main goal for this year and the next year to join and to include more retail companies into the initiative. Of course, they are like the main pillar of this initiative. We are working with them on measurement activity on ground level, insights within their plants, and we are gathering data of their food loss and waste volumes, and we trace with them punctual and detailed working activities each year. So the main goal with each of them is to have their baseline on food loss and waste levels and to work on them and define together goals for reduction, such percentage reduction each year, and work together to reach 2030 goals from the SDG goals from the UN. And on the other side, if we look at the next slide, we have other strategic alliances that are so important for the initiative, because we would like to gather every organization or company that has the main goal to reduce food loss and waste at each level. So that the value of the initiative is also that it's transversal, it's diverse, it's based on different knowledge. And so we have the Consumer Goods Forum, WWF, GS1, and other organizations that can support the initiative and share their knowledge with other organizations. Can you give me just 1 second? So sorry. So sorry. This is the challenge of being a mom and working. So sorry. And so these companies support us in giving us advices and giving us best practices and like tracing the path that we need to follow in collaboration with food companies. And they're doing an amazing job in all these 3 years that we have been launching the initiative. As we go through our presentation, we can also see how we promote like collaborative initiatives and food rallies and other like communication activities that all aims to reduce food loss and waste. For us, it's so important to have clear these 3 pillars that are the base of our initiative. So one is measurement, the other one is collaborative actions, and the other one is communication. So we need to raise awareness with consumers, with companies, and with all the organizations that have the main focus of reducing food loss and waste. And in 2023, the total volumes of reduction of food loss and waste has been more than 170,000 kilos from different companies. And this is just like the base that we're going to push and build on to reduce more food loss and waste from the whole supply chain. As we go through the presentation, thank you. These are just some assets that we have been developing. As I said, communication is such an important pillar for us, and so we invite oral signatories and all the donors from the network to join the communication campaign that we have launched last year. That is, I would say that in Spanish, that is, En México la comida no se tira. So in Mexico, we do not waste food, and they can make it personal. So as we see on the right side of the screen, we have Nestle that has realized this wonderful communication asset, inviting their customers and their consumers to do not waste food, mentioning data, mentioning the initiative Pacto por la Comida, and of course, the Mexican Food Banking Network. Each year on the 29th of September, as all you know, we celebrate the International Day to Reducing Food Loss and Waste. And we have panels, we have experts, we share data, we raise awareness, and we need to push through this issue since, again, reducing food losses and waste can save lives, can save environment, can reduce our impacts on natural resources, and it can really relieve hunger. And if we go through like the end of our presentation, we are actually working with some ambassadors, and one of them we are proudly to say that is Walmart Mexico and Central America. We have launched with them a specific campaign that is, thank you, a specific campaign that is called Imperfectas pero Buena, and it's focusing on fresh fruits and vegetables. As we know, fresh produce are the very first to go to waste, and we would like to raise awareness in consumers that they can buy imperfect fruits and vegetables and not let them to be wasted in all across every step of the supply chain. So we have the president and CEO of the Walmart Foundation in Mexico that really enjoyed being in the video, in the campaign, and so we have been this great ambassador of us. Also, it's one of the greatest donor of the network to be part of the campaign. And we are working with chefs, we are working with kitchen staff to reduce food losses and waste also at hospitality sector level. And again, in the next slide, we are currently working with different international projects to measure food loss and waste at the retail level. And we are working with the IDB, we're working with WWF and GS1 to focus it on retail sector in Mexico. This is one of our main goals for this year and the next years, to have more retailers and convenience stores franchise into the initiative. We know this is a sensible sector for us at a national level. We know there's still huge percentage of food wasted, and we need to tackle them. We need to work together with supermarkets and retail stores and reduce these volumes of food loss and waste thanks to food banks. So we see both sides. We know how we can measure food loss and waste. We know how can we reduce them. And we always say that food donation, it's the very first option to reduce food loss and waste. It's the fastest, it's the cheapest, it's the one that we can measure better, and it's the one that we can deliver results, tangible results in a short time. And if we go to the end of our presentation, that's all from us. I really appreciate your attention, and we are really, really interested to listen to your question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriela, for, as well as Claudia, for those very insightful presentations. It is terrific to hear about Mexico's leadership in this area and how you are not just reducing greenhouse gases, but also addressing issues of access to more affordable, nutritious food for those in the communities where you serve. Our last speaker of the day is Janelle. Janelle Myers is the Global Chief Sustainability Officer for Kellanova. Prior to becoming the Chief Sustainability Officer in December 2021, Ms. Myers held several roles in global procurement, including leading Kellanova's global supplier relationship management, supplier diversity, and responsible sourcing programs. She is the co-chair of the Consumer Goods Forum on Food Loss and Waste Coalition. Janelle, we are delighted to have you with us today. Over to you for your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Battle Creek, Michigan. I'm honored to have this opportunity to talk to you today about our journey and how we're helping create more sustainable and equitable access to our food system, including reducing food waste and supporting people who are food insecure. To begin, let's just take a look at our company background. If you'll go back to the front slide, apologies. W.K. Kellogg founded the Kellogg Company in February 1906, 118 years ago. He was an early conservationist, a leading philanthropist, and also the original well-being visionary. Motivated by a passion to help people and drive quality and drive innovation, he discovered the toasted flake cereal and shaped an entire industry. And he believed that the key to running a good business was to deliver and be good for community and for consumer. He really he believed in creating better days for all. And then you might be wondering, who is Kellanova? So in October of 2023, the Kellogg Company finalized our separation of our North America cereal business and resulting in two independent public companies, Kellanova, the company that I'm representing today, and W.K. Kellogg Company. And on this slide, you'll see some of the amazing brands that are in the Kellanova portfolio, including global brands such as Pringle and Cheez-It. So on the next slide, I'll walk you through how we're continuing to build on Mr. Kellogg's legacy. Thank you. So foundational to driving growth for our business is what we're calling our Kellanova Better Days Promise. It's our social and environmental purpose strategy that advances sustainable and equitable access to food. We're really very proud to build on the legacy of the former Kellogg Company by setting our ambitions even higher and increasing our commitment to create better days from better 3 billion people to 4 billion people by the end of 2030. I'll show you how we're doing that. On our next slide, to fulfill our Better Days promise, you can see our range of 2030 commitments. So in the area of well-being, we intend to nourish 1.5 billion people with our foods. In the area of food insecurity, we aspire to feed 400 million people. In the area of sustainability, we intend to nurture people and planet by creating a climate positive future. And this includes our new commitment to set company-wide emissions reductions in line with the Science-Based Target Initiative net zero standard by the end of 2050. We also value ED&I, equity, diversity, and inclusion in our own workforce, and we are working to engage 2 billion people along our journey. So I won't hit all 4 areas today. I'm just going to hit 2 that are relevant for the conversation. So first, in the area of hunger. Feeding people who are facing insecurity has been a long cornerstone of our community initiatives. We partner with food banks, many here represented, on 6 continents and sponsor food drives to help stock community food pantries around the world and provide essential food to those coping with natural disasters. We also support feeding programs in more than 20 countries to help children everywhere reach their full potential. And through this work, we'll feed 400 million people in need by the end of 2030. As of 2022, we've already fed over 252 million people, including 247 million through our food donation programs and over 5 million kids through the school feeding programs. Next, if you'll go to sustainability, I'll run through some of our high-level goals before I dive at the end into food waste. So as a company, we will continue to respect the natural limits of our planet by conserving natural resources all along our value chain. By meeting our science-based climate targets, responsibly sourcing our ingredients, reducing waste, and providing sustainable packaging that is reusable, recyclable, or compostable. So our commitments include reducing greenhouse gas emissions in our own operations and across our value chain in Scope 3 and achieving net zero by 2050. We're going to be committing to 100% renewable electricity in all of our facilities globally and reducing water use. We'll be working towards more reusable, recyclable, and compostable packaging. We're working on building resilient and responsible supply chains for our 12 priority ingredients. Those are ingredients like corn, wheat, rice, and potatoes, cocoa, and oils. And finally, we'll advance the well-being of people in our value chain, all along our value chain, from the farmers, our suppliers, our processors, and including those in the community, and really trying to prioritize support for the most vulnerable groups. And finally, food waste. So for our food waste goal, very consistent with what you've heard from many of the other speakers, we are aligned with the 12.3 SDGs. We have committed to reduce food waste 50% in our own global manufacturing facilities by the end of 2030, and happy to share that we're more than halfway to that goal. So you might be asking, how are we doing that? So to achieve our goal, we are focused primarily on measuring food waste and loss in our own facilities and implementing solutions such as modifying equipment to enhance production efficiency. This helps us eliminate waste in our own processes when making the food. To be consistent with many of the presentations prior, we measure and report our food waste in conformance with the Food Loss and Waste Protocol. This protocol for us allows the entity to choose the combination of materials and destinations it considers to be food lost. Kellanova's definition of food loss and waste, which we label as organic waste, extends to all organic waste lost in our facilities. And you can find more information about how we measure our food loss and waste. We actually publicly have transparency on our website. You can see our food loss and waste protocol as it aligns to the food waste law public protocol as well. We also recognize that to tackle food waste, in particular in our overall scope 3 and upstream with customers, we need to drive scalable solutions and to learn best practices. There's two main coalitions that we are members of, just two, there's many others, but I wanted to flag two. First is definitely Champions 12.3. I really appreciate the support of WRI of that coalition. It's a coalition of executives, governments, businesses, international organizations such as Kellanova, Farmer Group, and civil society, and we're all mobilizing action against the SDG 12.3 by the end of 2030. And the other one is the Consumer Goods Forum. So the CGF is an industry group that brings together global consumer goods retailers and manufacturers. And we use this as a forum to collaborate alongside many other key stakeholders to secure consumer trust and to drive positive change in the food industry, including our focus on food waste. And along with Walmart, I'm very proud to co-chair the Food Loss and Waste Coalition, which supports an increase in reporting against the Food Loss and Waste Protocol, and also working up and down our chain to identify solutions. And then finally, some other ways that we're contributing to food waste. We're working, in the farmer landscape, working with partners to reduce pre and post-harvest loss on farms to ensure that most of the food that is grown is consumed. We're also reaching out to consumers. We're standardizing our food labels and educating consumers if food is safe to consume, as well as delivering tips and packaging innovation to help them reduce unnecessary food waste at home. And finally, we're sharing with communities. While it doesn't contribute to our food waste directly in our own facilities, as I mentioned earlier, we donate food to help people in need, either due to natural disasters or chronic hunger in the communities around the world that we solve, around the world that we support. And we're really excited to work together with many on the phone here in the presentations to be able to quantify those food donations as they relate to greenhouse gas reductions in our scope 3 as well. And with that, I'll wrap up there and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Janelle, for those remarks and for giving us a better look and understanding of the leadership that Kellanova is providing in this important area for making change. This has been just a truly insightful discussion. But I think we have an opportunity, a bit of time for a few questions. And I'd like to start with you, Brian. Brian, what do you believe are the most exciting developments you see in terms of food loss and waste reporting? And I must ask this question: what are the biggest barriers and hurdles to bringing this all together and moving us forward in a productive way?
A great question. Thank you. In terms of what's most exciting, I think we're starting to see, I'll say two things on that. So food loss and waste, I think we're starting to see that more companies are taking it seriously as an issue and addressing it, not as its own issue, but addressing it in tandem with other pieces of their operations. So it's not just about doing what's great for the planet or what's great for people, even though those are wonderful goals, but actually it makes good business sense to address food loss and waste. And I think also we're seeing it tie in with things like greenhouse gas emissions to a greater extent. And I think this webinar is a really great example of that, where we're seeing these issues in a more holistic way. And it's not useful to keep everything in its own little silo. Instead, it's when we can start seeing the linkages between areas, it helps us to address things more systematically. In terms of barriers, I think there's just a lack of knowledge in some cases and a lack of time, especially for smaller organizations, smaller companies, where maybe this is an issue they would love to be paying more attention to, but they don't have the resources, they don't know where to get started, that sort of thing. So I think that's certainly a major barrier, and one that it's on all of us to be figuring out how to reduce those barriers and make this information more accessible, and make the whole process easier so that we can focus on the action, which is the really important part.
Well, thank you for that. We definitely want to focus on the action. Moving the action forward is critical. Claudia and Gabriella, how would a mandatory Scope 3 emission or food waste reporting policy impact BAMX's food recovery work? And if a policy were to be implemented, what would you like to see in the policy to support your work? For example, what considerations should policymakers keep in mind when designing a Scope 3 emissions or food waste reporting policy so that it indeed supports food recovery efforts?
Thank you for your question, Ertharin. It's an incredible question, and in my opinion, as for the experience of the Mexican food banking network and Pacto por la Comida, that would be a huge shift in the actual system of recovering food. That would be a total game changer. That would mean that companies would be really compromising in measuring and reporting and reducing their Scope 3 emissions that, as we know, they are related to food waste. So for the food banking network at national level, that would mean again, less food loss and waste, more donation, or elevating the quality of the food that we are recovering today. And one of the most important things, let me share you that with you, is that what we are looking for is that these surpluses would be keeping for human consumption. So the most important thing is that these surpluses would be used to feed people first, and not be using, as are we seeing, into biogas, into compost, or other uses that, of course, they are noble and understandable. But what we are looking for is, again, to feed people first. We need that these surpluses would be kept into the human consumption supply chain, and the final beneficiaries of these surpluses would be people, and people in hunger, and especially in Mexico, where we are facing the struggle of more than 49 million people in food insecurity. So that will be a huge shift. And I think policymakers should have in mind that labels and expiration date and more policies and facilities at a fiscal level or at a legal level should facilitate companies and organizations like us to do our work and recover more food for human consumption again. Thank you.
Gabriella, thanks for that very concise but very important response, because in the food system community, we don't have the luxury of just addressing the greenhouse gas reduction. It is about how do we ensure human health in the work that we perform to reduce those greenhouse gases, but also to make nutritious food more affordable and available. So spot on. Janelle, over to you. We know in the corporate sector, in the business sector, that if the policies and the initiatives don't influence in the business activities, that it becomes very difficult to maintain and to scale them. So how do you leverage food waste reporting as a powerful tool to influence your business behavior and promoting more sustainable food systems within the business operations of Kellanova that other businesses could potentially learn from?
It's a really good question. And just first off, I have to say thank you for having a food loss and waste protocol. We believe absolutely in all the different areas across, environmental, social governance. It is best to have universal standards. That way, from an internal perspective, it's a great tool for us to be very clear with our own operations, our own operators, folks within our bakeries, our suppliers, our category managers. It is really important to have clear guidelines on how we're measuring and how we're defining everything. So first, for us, it's a great engagement tool, a great education tool. But we put our guidance, which aligns with the food loss and waste protocol, we put that out on our website so that we want to be very transparent that we're supporting food loss and waste, that exact protocol. And that also that we're using that as an education tool and setting expectations with our suppliers as well too. When we have over 20,000 suppliers across the entire supply chain around the globe, and those are exactly the same protocol that we would want them to use and adopt as well. And I think it's really important for us all to have the same measures so that we can all understand our progress together. If everyone's measuring something different, it could be very duplicative, and we may not know exactly where we stand as a globe around food waste. So I think we found with the Consumer Goods Forum, the Food Loss Waste Protocol, we've asked all of our members, obviously on an annual basis to report to that. And that gives us insight on what is the baseline for the coalition and how do we know if we're making, progress or not. And it also helps you quantify which initiatives might have a greater, gain on food waste than another. So you can really help identify best practices and help socialize those as well. I think it's critically important.
Well, thank you for demonstrating how this you can replicate the work that you are doing inside Kellanova across corporates with communication. I have lots of questions, but I really want to get our audience involved in this discussion. And so I'd ask any of the members of the audience, and thank you for staying with us. And I think the fact that we have so many of you still listening to these presentations is a compliment to the value of the information that our panelists are delivering here today. And so let's get you involved in this discussion. And I'll start with one of the first questions that was included in the Q&A as I invite others to bring your questions forward. And that question was regarding these voluntary agreements, say between companies or voluntary agreements that may be put forward by governments. How can they work in the context of many countries, which I understand do not have specific food waste policies? And how can we make such agreements flourish across the globe in what are the types of activities, actions, or narratives that we should build to encourage other companies and countries to enter into voluntary agreements? Who wants to start?
I can start with that one. I have a few thoughts there. So the very tricky thing about food loss and waste as an issue is that it seems like a no-brainer. It seems like it should be, there's food that's going to waste, we should do something about it. The challenge is that the interventions are extremely different depending on what part of the world you're in, what type of food you're looking at, what stage of the supply chain you're in. It's all very tailored. So certainly our approach when we look at food loss and waste as an issue is there are still common areas. So we try to find that common ground, like using the Target Measure Act approach, which is something that provides a simple overarching framework that then you can drill down into more specifics depending on geography and sector and so on. So I think it's a matter of finding what is broadly applicable and then narrowing things down from there. So if, for example, our team at WRI Africa has actually developed a version of the accounting and reporting standards specific to Kenya, and taking into account the specifics of policies within Kenya, the sectors within Kenya, the various infrastructure matters relating to the country. And so by taking that broad item of the accounting and reporting standard and then finding, okay, where can we tailor this to our specific environment? You keep that consistency between countries and between our global efforts, but it helps to make it more specifically useful in a specific environment.
That's a great answer. But let me go on to the next question that we have. And Janelle, I think this one goes directly to you. How can organizations effectively leverage food cost donations, rescue, and redistribution to promote sustainability, especially when external funding is not available?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, our food donation program has been a legacy for Kellogg and Kellanova as well too, and partnered with many on the phone, GFN and BAMX and others as well. And for us, we definitely we see it as for us, it's a tremendous business opportunity to give back to our communities. And it's something that we fund ourselves as well too, those donations. And we think it's a really important benefit. We think about the communities of which we serve, where we have our own facilities, but also where there's consumers as well too, when we want to make sure that we're helping address food insecurity. And I think that's really important as a food company. We need to be thinking about the food system in a sustainable and equitable way. So for us, we do fund a lot of that as well too. But I also think about it as partnerships. I think that's why partnerships like GFN and YBMX are so critically important, because they can help, it really, exponentially increase our reach by partnering with organizations such as the Global Food Banking Systems.
That's a great answer. Gabriela, Claudia, I turn to you because you work in the food banking systems. How can the organizations like yours support these types of efforts when there's limited funding?
Thank you for the question, Ertharin, and of course I'm sharing the same thoughts with my colleague panelists. It's hard, it's challenging sometimes to work, of course, with limited funds. We sustain all our activities thanks to our food banks and their local activities, and thanks to our national and international funders that I would like to remark that they are 100% from private sector. Companies like Kellanova or Nestle or Unilever are supporting us with food donation and food rescuing, of course, but they also provide us with funds or projects or support for our local food banks, and international donors or foundation like Posner Foundation or national foundation that can support our work. And of course, the Global Food Banking Network, there is a huge supporter of our activities, both in with economic funds and with trainings and building capacities to our local food banks. So it's challenging, but we have been working for more than 30 years in the country, and we would like to say that we were keeping working in the same way. And something that it's really make us proud in a country like Mexico is that we have never been receiving government funds or public funds, and we have never been related to some specific political party or some specific government funds. So we are totally independent, and the main support that we have is from private sector. And we are really thankful with all of donors and supporters. It's challenging, but we are looking at new financial instruments. For instance, the Mexican Food Banking Network is the first food banking network in the world to have their own carbon credits to be sold in the international market. So that's a fund that we rely on for our financial sustainability, for the office itself, for the national office, and for the food banks, for the local food banks. So this is the way we're looking ahead. We're looking beyond like traditional financial instruments, and we explore what opportunities are out there for an organization like us. And carbon credit has been one of the most successful projects of the last year. Of course, every project within the Mexican Food Banking Network can work like business unity and be self-sustainable, like Pacto por la Comida itself and other projects that we have. So we look for financial sovereignty, sustainability in different ways, and it's challenging, but it's the most amazing adventure that we've been on in the last decades. Thank you. I don't know if Claudia, would you like to compliment? Or if there is time, you tell us.
I guess I think we may have lost Arthur, and so I'm coming back in. It's great because I get to take a moment to just thank all of you for this amazing, amazing webinar. Like, I hope you saw there were a lot of like chats and questions from people about following up with resources and the video. And so just to let everyone know, there will be a video available from this. And I think my next final step is we're 1 minute out is to ask Doug, I think, to come in and give us another closeout. And we have a final slide that has some information on our upcoming webinar. So Doug, I'll let you take it from here, but just thank you again to Claudia, Gabriella, Janelle, Brian, Gray, and Ertharin for the amazing discussion and presentations.
Yes, thank you, Emily. Again, I just want to echo what Emily shared. Brian, Claudia Sanchez Castro, and Gabriel Lozado from GFN Partner Food Bank, BAMX, Janelle Myers from Kellanova, and Brian Lipinski from the World Resources Institute. We are so grateful for your input and your thoughtful answers. I especially want to thank Earthman Cousin, who unfortunately did drop off, but Earthman helps keep us on time and moving forward, and fantastic partner. And I also want to thank, of course, Emily Broad-Leib and Gray Norton, and just the incredible partner and colleagues we have at the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School. This work is so meaningful. It does change lives. It helps move us forward. And so thank you for the ongoing work. As you can see on the slide, we are planning another webinar on June 17th, talking about how government grants and incentives can help spur food recovery and support the work of food banks and other food recovery organizations. Please go ahead and sign up for the listserv and contacts on the FLPC website. Please go to the Atlas website. And if you have thoughts on who we could have speak on the June 17th webinar, please also forward those along. And then lastly, I want to thank, because there, as Emily said, there were just great questions shared by participants. So thank you all for joining us. You proved that once again, food reporting is not just for data nerds, it's for people active in this work and who want to make the planet a better place. So thank you all.